Hey everyone, you may have seen on my Instagram I built up a pimp new wheel. Actually it's right here. I built up this pimp new wheel and I asked a question, would you guys like a wheel building tutorial? And I was surprised to see, yes, people do want to see one. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to show you guys how to build wheels strong enough to cope with trials and pretty much anything you can throw at it. Now I've built a lot of wheels over the last few years. I've built all my own wheels. I actually built Danny's wheels and I've built a lot of the wheels for the Inspired full bikes, their top of the range models as well. In fact, if you have an Inspired team bike, just take the wheels off, take off the rim tape and see if you can see a little signature on there. You may be surprised. I'd like to think I can build a fairly strong wheel. Danny's wheels seem to cope alright and I've actually not broken a wheel probably in the last 10 years. Well, pretty much since I've been riding street and the rims are actually quite strong, I've never broken a wheel. I think a lot of people think that wheel building is some kind of black magic, that you have to be some kind of wizard to be able to do it. But actually there's a couple of things you do have to follow, but once you know them, wheel building is actually really easy. And I'm going to go into some detail in this video, but I'm going to try and break it down into steps, and if you follow them and get them right, then I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at how easy it is and how strong a wheel you get at the end of it. Before we get into the details of actually building the wheel, obviously you need some kit. So I've got some hubs and spokes, and I've got a rim. And if you're interested to know what I'm building with, I'm actually on the Industry 9 Torch hub. This is the single speed version on the rear with a 10mm bolt-off axle, and I've got the front one on the front wheel to match. I really like these hubs. They've got super fast engagements. They've been really reliable with how I've been running them so far. Bolt up obviously means that they're secure on your bike and they're super lightweight as well, so I actually really like these. The rim I'm using is the 26-inch carbon rim by Light Bicycle. This is the Enduro model. It is 38mm wide, the heavy duty version, just because this is going to be my rear wheel and I want it to be as strong as it can be. It's hookless design and is pretty damn light. Spokes wise, I'm using Sapin double butted. I like the black ones just because it makes the wheels a bit stealthy. I always use these spokes. I always use a double butted. I find the butted spokes have a little bit more strength just because they allow to flex a little bit more rather than just being too stiff and then they just snap. I've probably snapped maybe less than a handful of spokes in the last 10 years, and they're usually because I hit them against a rock or something. So yeah, highly recommended. Sapin spokes have done me really well over the last few years. And nipples wise, I've gone with, I don't actually know what brand these are, I just got them off eBay. They're aluminium, and I've mentioned this in previous vlogs, I actually prefer aluminium nipples. I find the softer material doesn't bind quite as much against the harder spokes, so you can actually get them tighter because there's less friction, resulting in a tighter wheel build. And to be honest with you, I don't ride in the wet or salt that much, so corrosion isn't an issue. And later on I'm going to be telling you that we need to lube the nipples, and yeah, that means they don't corrode as well. So alloy nipples, absolutely great. I don't think I've broken one in the last 5-10 years either, so yeah, absolutely fine to use aluminium nipples. And they save weight, and they look pimp. There are some absolutely vital tools that you'll need. You'll need a spoke key. My spoke key of choice is the spoke key. This is the workshop one with the double layer steel inserts in there. Just means it's less likely to round off the aluminium nipples just because there's twice as much area it's been worked on. So yeah, I really like these. They're actually really comfortable on the hands, don't have the hard, sharp bits, and they've actually got a bit of flex, which really saves my hands and fingers. So yeah, always use these in my wheel builds. The next vital thing which I recommend for every single wheel build is some lube. Even with brass nipples, I always recommend lube them up. It just means if you ever want to undo them in the future, they're gonna do that. Plus, it means you can get them tighter as well because it's less friction. The next two vital things which I always recommend for a wheel build are a little bit odd, but you should have a shoe. I'll explain why you need this later. This is something not many people do in their wheel builds, but believe me, this is probably one of the most important things you're going to need for this. So you need a shoe, and to go with the shoe, you need some cardboard or a carpet or a mat or something. I'm actually using the box the rims came in, and this will work pretty damn well. These two will work together later, and I know you're probably a little bit confused right now, but yeah, I'll explain it all later and it should make total sense. Those are the vital things that you'll need. Without those, you still will be able to build a wheel, but these will really make the difference in building a good wheel. So those are vital. The next things will make life a lot easier if you have them. Firstly, quite obviously, a wheel build stand. Jeez. I've got a Park tool. This is the TS2. I've got it bolted to a massive bit of wood. This is a heavy bit of kit, just to try and make it a little bit more stable. I've been using this one for years. I get on with it super well. I've not used any other brands, and there may be some really good, cheaper alternatives to this. And even, this is why I'm saying this isn't vital, you can just use a zip tie in your frame or your fork, and it is possible, but this will make your life a lot easier. Speaking of making your life easier, getting yourself a nipple twister will make life a hell of a lot easier as well. This is effectively just a screwdriver, but it's got a shaped tip to it which fits the back of the nipples perfectly, and then you can just tighten them down like that. And yeah, this is a real time saver. If you're building a lot of wheels, this little thing is worth its weight in gold. But it's not vital, so you don't need it. And the same can be said for a tension gauge as well. I use this as a quality control when I'm building wheels for friends. I used it when I built all the wheels for Inspired Bikes. And this, basically all it does is make sure that all your spoke tensions are equal. Now I don't really use this when I'm building my own personal wheels, just because I find I can do it by feel. And yeah, I've never had a broken wheel in the last 10 years, however long I've been riding street. So these aren't vital, but if you're doing it for a living and you just want to get your quality control spot on, yeah, these things are pretty good as well. I think that's all the equipment that I'm going to need for this build. So the next thing, I'm just going to have to get on with this, and this is when you need to start paying attention, because the first thing I'm going to show you is the lacing up of the wheel, and this is pretty much the most important thing. So let's clear all this away and get started. Okay, so lacing the wheel. Now I'm gonna go and do the rear wheel today. I've already built the front wheel. I'm choosing to do the rear wheel on video because the spoke lengths on a single speed hub are actually exactly the same on either side, and I think it'll just be less confusing that way. All these points I'm going to be saying here work exactly the same on the front hub, or even if it's not a single speed rear hub and you've got different size flanges, it's all exactly the same. You just have different spoke lengths on different sides. So as long as you can make sure you don't get your spokes mixed up, all these tips will work exactly the same, so don't stress. And speaking of spokes, if you're going to be building a wheel and you don't know what length you need, I highly recommend getting in touch with Tartybikes. They have their own self-built spoke calculator, and it's highly accurate. And even if you're not getting the spokes from them, which I highly recommend you do, they're going to be happy to help you. Either phone them up, tell them what rim and hub you're using, how many holes, what cross you want to do, and they'll be able to work it out. Or you can go online and order the spokes in there, put in the notes what combo of rim and hub you're using, and they'll send you the right spokes. Now what I'm going to do is show you my preferred way of lacing up this hub. There are a few different ways of doing it, a different order, but as long as you follow the tips and actually get the correct spokes in the correct holes, it doesn't really matter which way you do it. As long as the spokes are in the right way, it will work out. When lacing the hub, there's actually 4 stages. You've got 2 flanges with 2 sides each. So I'll start on one flange, then I'll swap over to the other flange, then I'll go back to the start of the flange, and then I'll go back and finish off the last flange. So what I'm going to do now is show you the first stage, and probably the most important thing, the key spoke. The first spoke that you put in. This lines up your logos with a valve, make sure there's a gap at the valve that your pump can go into, and it just makes everything look a lot more pro. What I normally do is I'll grab 8 spokes. I'll take a guess at how many spokes it is. It feels about 8. Sometimes I can just pick up exactly 8. I'm normally just 1 or 2 off, so we'll have to wait and see. Now, this is important. Which side of a hub do you start on? Now, I've always been taught, and I agree, this is the way we did it at Tartybikes, this is the way Sheldon Brown does it. Start on the side that has the most power or torque going through it. So on the rear wheel, it's going to be the drive side. On the front wheel, it's going to be the disc side. If it doesn't have any disc mounts, it doesn't matter which side it's going on. And I actually put all the spokes in one side at a time. I find some people will put them in one, put it to the rim, put another one, put it to the rim. I find this way is a little bit more efficient, a bit faster, as long as you don't lose track of your spokes. So that's the way I do it. If you prefer to do it one at a time, that's totally cool, whatever works for you. So like I said, this first spoke is important. This is the key spoke. There's 2 key spokes in the entire build. This is the first one. So if you're going to skip the rest of the build, don't skip this bit and don't skip the second key spoke. These are important. Because it's going to be hard to see on that, I'm going to get the GoPro out and I'm going to get a close-up and show you exactly where it's going and why. Okay, so here we have my hub. Now, if you want your wheels to look really, really cool, you want to be able to see a logo when you look through the valve. Now I could either choose to see that one, or I could line it up with the center of the Industry 9 logo there, but I'm going to choose this. What we need to do now is point the drive side towards you and try and find the hole which is closest to the center of the logo. So once you've found a spoke hole that lines up closest with the center of the logo you want to do, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, but actually it's pretty simple if you think about it. Depending on how many crosses your spokes are going to do is how many holes you count to the left. So actually, I'm going to confess, this wheel build is a 4-cross wheel build. I'd normally go for a 3-cross, but because this rim is so deep, Tartybikes unfortunately didn't have spokes quite short enough that I needed. So we've gone for 4-cross just because that's the only way we could get this one to work. Normally I'd go 3-cross, but the way I'm going to do this system is brilliant because it works exactly the same no matter how many numbers of crosses you're going to put in your spokes. So once you've found your starting hole, I'm going 4-cross like we mentioned, so I'm going to count 4 holes to the left. So 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then the spoke goes in that. And you should start with your head on the outside and your shoulder on the inside. Once your key spoke is in, I always keep a finger on that, keep my hand wide, and then just put the spokes in every second hole after that. So like I mentioned, I've just kept my finger on that one spoke, the key spoke, the entire time, and I've just let all the others dangle down. So just to recap, I found the spoke hole that most lined up with the center of the logo. I counted 4 spoke holes to the left because I'm building a 4-cross wheel. If you were building 3-cross, you'd count 3 to the left. If you're building 2-cross, 2, 5-cross, you'd count 5. It's really as simple as that. So as long as you can remember, you go to the left to the same number of spoke crosses you do. And hopefully that's easy enough to remember. I've remembered it, so I'm sure you guys can as well. So now that I've got all my 8 spokes in and I've got hold of my key spoke, I'm not letting go of that because I don't want it to get lost. You can recount it again, but as long as you keep a finger on it, you know exactly where it is. That's when we get our rim. To find the correct hole in the rim, it's dead easy. All you need to do is find the valve hole and count 1 to the left. We went left on the hub, so we go left on the rim as well. So the first hole to the left of the valve is the one you want to go to. So now we know exactly which spoke we're using and exactly which hole it's going to in the rim. I normally stand the rim vertically, either on my lap or on a table like this. Get my key spoke, pop it through the rim. I've got my nipples ready, normally just lying in a tub or on this table. And that is the first spoke done. That is one of the most important steps. And if you get that right, you're probably going to get the rest of it right as well. So what I normally do now is a bit like I did with my first 8 spokes on the hub, put them all in the hub, so I'm going to put them all in the rim now. Now when every 2 spoke holes in the hub, that translates to every 4 spoke holes in the rim. So count 1, 2, 3, 4. That goes in there. Pop the nipple on and just repeat until you've done the entire side. Don't worry if your hub's twisting one way or the other just yet. We'll sort that out in a little bit. But the next thing we're going to do is the second key spoke. This is the second most important spoke you need to put in. If you get this one wrong, your wheel isn't going anywhere. So exactly the same as last time, I grab another, what feels like 8 spokes. I reckon one more. Okay, that feels like 8. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is lay the wheel down on the table. And you can see this is our key spoke because this is the one closest to the valve. And now we're going to make sure we twist the hub the correct way. So what you want to do is have a big gap at the top, so that when you have to pump up your wheel, you've got a big gap to get the valve head in. So what we're going to do is twist the hub to the right, looking at it from this side, and that way you'll get your bigger gap at the top. So what we're going to do now is put in the key spoke on the non-drive side, and exactly the same as the other side, we're going to put them in this direction, so the heads are on the outside and the shoulders are on the inside. Now this is where it differs a little bit and gets a little bit complicated. Rather than counting from the logo, we're actually going to get the key spoke that we used last time, follow that down to the hub, and then where it goes into the hub on the other side, we're going to follow it up to this side and find the spoke hole, which is the first spoke hole to the right of that spoke on this side. So in this case, it's this hole here. So So it may sound complicated, but it's actually fairly simple. I'll repeat it anyway. We've got the valve, we've got the first spoke we put in, we follow that down to the hub flange, and then we find out which is the spoke hole to the right hand side of the first spoke on the other side of the flange. Now that may sound quite complicated, but when you do have a wheel in front of you and you can actually see it, it is a bit simpler. Now that is really important that you do get that spoke in the correct hole. If you go too far to the right, it's not going to work. If you go too far to the left, it's not going to work. So it's the first spoke to the right of the spoke on the other side. You got that? And then, just like the other side, what I like to do is put all the spokes in. Again, you can do this any way you want, as long as you got those two key spokes in the correct place. It doesn't matter which combo you put the rest of the spokes in. So, just like the other side, every second spoke hole, in they go. Easy peasy. And I even guessed the correct number of spokes. So, trusting you've all got that in the correct hole. Hopefully you can see exactly which one that is going into there. This is the key spoke. Got all the other spokes in, and now this one, because it's gone to the right of the spoke on the other side, it goes to the right of the spoke up at the rim as well. So now we've determined which hole in the rim it goes to. It is to the right hand side of the original spoke you put in. We can put all the other spokes in. One spoke to the right of every spoke you put in so far. I'm talking to the camera, this sounds super complicated, but it's really not. I really hope I'm not overcomplicating this too much. It is pretty simple. I'd highly recommend practicing on some old wheels, and even if you've got a wheel, take it apart and try and put it back together again. If you want to go straight into a posh wheel set and do this, yeah, it's risky, but as long as you don't do anything too drastic, you should be okay. So there you go, that is 2 stages of the 4-stage lacing process. There's an important thing to do here, which is make sure the hub is spun the correct way. My valve is down here, and I'm not sure you can currently see the spokes are going the wrong direction, so there's actually a small gap to put the valve in. So what I want to do is, so now the hub's rotated the correct way, you can now see the hub logo through the valve hole, and you've got enough gap here to put your pump head, so that's ideal. I should probably explain that the reason why I put in one flange and then the other flange is because if you put all the spokes in the first flange, when you come to put the spokes in the opposite side, you've got your spokes crossing both ways, and it's actually really hard to thread the spokes. You have to bend them around. So that's why I do it one flange at a time. It makes life a lot easier. Now that we've got the 2 key spokes in place and we've got all the other corresponding spokes in place, there's only 2 more stages to the lacing, and to be honest with you, this part isn't as important. We started off with the heads on the outside and the shoulders on the inside. We're going to just do the opposite. So the heads are on the inside and the shoulders are on the outside. Now that's all the stage 3 spokes in now. There is no key spoke, so it doesn't matter which spoke you start with. Just as long as your hub is spun the correct way, you can start with any spoke you like. So I'm just sticking with this spoke. Now, the important thing to remember now is how many crosses you are doing with your spokes. Like I mentioned, I'm going for a 4-cross build, so I'm having to cross 1, 2, 3, 4 spokes. So it actually goes over the first 3, and then under the 4th one. And then that goes next to the spoke here. You want to have your spokes in a bunch of 3 at this stage. Okay, so I've just put this spoke in. Just to repeat, this is a 4-cross wheel build. If you're doing 3-cross, you only cross 3 spokes here, but I've crossed 4. So I've crossed this spoke here, right down at the head, crossed this spoke here and this spoke here. It goes over those 3 spokes, and then we've got the 4th spoke here, which goes underneath. Now, if this was a 3-cross build, you'd go over 2 spokes and then under the 3rd one. So now you've put that spoke in, the first spoke on the 3rd stage, it's actually starting to look like a wheel. You can see the cross pattern has started, the hub is now locked in the correct orientation, and it's just a case of locking all these spokes in now, so just going around and popping them all in. Now there's one great tip I can give you guys here. If you have a deep profile rim like I've got here, it's actually really hard to get the nipples to reach the spokes. So one thing you can do is grab a spare spoke, get your nipple and thread it on the opposite direction. And then that's held in place. You can actually pop that through the wheel and then the spoke will reach it fine. There's another tip I can give you now. If you're trying to thread the nipple onto the spoke and you're finding the spoke's quite short, just put the rim against your shoulder and give the hub a good tug. like that. Often the nipples will just get hung up on the inside of the rim, so if you just pull them out, it'll give you a lot more room. Likewise, you don't have to be delicate with the wheel at this point. If you want to get the hub somewhere, you know, you can give it a good old tug. It's not going to go anywhere. As long as the nipples are actually threaded on decently, they're not going to pop off. So if you're finding you're struggling to get the hub to where you want, the spokes aren't going on long enough, give it a good old rattle and that'll probably give you a lot more room to get onto the spokes there. Cool, that is stage 3 done. Just one stage left, and it is literally just a case of repeating what you just did in stage 3 on the other side, except now you have the advantage that the hub is already locked into the correct orientation. So yeah, simply grab your next 8 spokes, pop them in, and get those laced up as well. Okay, so that is a fully laced wheel. Fingers crossed that's all gone really well for you guys. That is pretty much the halfway mark now. So we've done all the lacing. All we need to do now is get these spokes up to tension, make sure the wheel is true and stressed. So let's get on with that. Cool, so now you've got your wheel mounted in your stand, your frame, your forks, whatever you choose. The next step now is we've got to get the lube on the go. A lot of you have probably said already, oh, you haven't lubed the nipples. I know a few people will lube the nipples right at the start or dip them in grease or the spokes in grease or whatever. I find that's a good way of doing it, but as you're working, you'll get grease or lube or whatever you've used all over your wheel, all over your hands. Whereas this method, if you leave it till now, you can actually come along. I'll just start at the nipple just so I know I've done them all. And then if you just put them on a little bit of thread that's showing, you'll get the capillary action will actually suck that fluid into the nipple and it is completely mess free. So yeah, now I'll just go around, put a little bit of lube on every single nipple. That way they'll tighten a little bit more because they'll have more lubrication and they won't seize. So I think this is a pretty important part. I've had wheels in the past which I've built with alloy nipples and I've run them for 2 years or so, and then I've wanted to rebuild the wheel and reuse the nipples, and yeah, because I've lubed them, they've been absolutely fine, undid, no problems, and I've reused alloy nipples in multiple wheels with no problems. Right, so that's every nipple lubed. Now I just give the wheel a bit of a spin. You may find you get a little bit of splashback, so ideally do this in your garage, not in your lounge. And then yeah, so that should all be evenly spread in the nipples and no mess. Perfect. After you've lubed the nipples, the next step is to try and get all the nipples and spokes to the same point of tension. And I'll just go around every single nipple and turn them until the thread no longer shows. That way, all the nipples, all the spokes are done at exactly the same point. So from then on, you can do exactly the same number of turns on every nipple and you know they're all the same. Okay, so now we've done that, that means that all the spokes and nipples are on an even playing field. They're all at the same point of tightness. Now they are still very slack. There's no tension actually put on the spokes yet, but it just means that they're all even and we can all do the same number of turns on every spoke from now on. So speaking of, this is when I get my spoke key out. I'll find the valve hole, just because if you start at the valve, you know where you start and finish. And then at this point, depending on the wheel, this is where I kind of go with feel a little bit. I'll probably put maybe 1 or 2 turns on every nipple just to get a benchmark sort of tightness all around. It's important not to go too tight too quickly, because if you start going super tight on the first few nipples, by the time you get to the other side, you're not going to get them any tighter and your wheel's going to be so up and down. Yeah, it won't be usable. So if you just keep it 1, 2, even just 1 turn, it's better to do too few turns and have to keep on going back and adding turns than it is to just go nuts and adding lots at the start and then having to undo it all and start again. So yeah, 1, 2, 1, 2. And often I'll work in half turns, so rather than counting that as 2 turns, I'll count that as 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 halves rather than 2. That's just how I work. Do it however you want, as long as you end up with the same result, it's all good. At this point, you may come across some spokes which are tighter than others or are a little bit harder to turn. I would recommend just do the same number of turns on them anyway. You don't want to start, oh, this one's a bit tight, I'll go maybe 1.5 or just 1 turn, because it just maybe it's a bit tight against the joint up at the other spokes, or it's got a bit just generally more friction, the nipple or spoke wasn't made as well, so it's important do exactly the same number of turns. They all want to be completely even. Okay, so I've just gone and done 2 full turns on every spoke, and there's a little bit of tension in there, but they're still relatively slack. What I want is a good base level of tension, because if you start trying to chew the wheel when the spokes are still slack, it's not really going to go anywhere. So what I'll probably do now is go around and put 1 extra full turn on every one, just so there is some actual tension on the spokes. Okay, so that is the extra full turn on, so that's 3 full turns from the baseline of the nipples being run up to the end of the threads on the spokes. So hopefully you can follow all that. At this point, there is a fair bit of tension on the spokes, but still, there's got quite a way to go until it's final tension. But you can kind of get a feel. There is some tension on there. It's only at this point do I consider actually starting to true the wheel. The first thing I want to do is get the dish right. So that's making sure the rim is completely in the center of where the frame would be. Now this truing stand only has 1 truing arm. It did have 2, 1 on each side, but I find I prefer working with just 1. The way I find out the dish is to run my truing stand so it's just tapping the rim, and then I take the wheel out, swap it around, and see how it is. So it's not hitting, so I know it needs to dish slightly over this way. Not by much, but just a little bit. Okay, so now we've determined the rim needs to come over this way slightly. So what I'm going to do is find the point where it's got the biggest gap between my truing friction piece, whatever you want to call that one. And then I'll just start tightening the spokes just a little bit, just to bring the wheel over towards the side I want it to go to. So what I might do now as well, because it's just got 1 little kink right there, where it's out of true, rather than try and bring the whole thing over this way to start with, I'll just get rid of that little kink. So I'll just tighten the spokes on this side ever so slightly. And I may even just loosen the ones on this side as well, just to try and keep those spoke tensions as even as possible. So what I'm actually doing now is a combination of truing and dishing it at the same time. Now because the wheel is now actually pretty straight, and I know all the spokes have pretty much got the same number of turns on them, if I want the wheel to go that way, I'm only going to go and do maybe 1/4 of a turn on every spoke on the side I want it to go to that direction. So it doesn't need to go over very much. Cool, so now I've made the rim completely dished. It is exactly in the middle of the hub, frame, box, whatever you're using. And now it's a case of getting it true, and then we need to stress it out. Now truing the wheel is actually dead simple. If you want the wheel to go that way, then you just tighten the spokes on this side or loosen the ones on this side. If you want the wheel to go that way, then you just tighten the spokes on this side or loosen the spokes on that side. It's pretty simple really. The best way to do it is probably go a little bit at a time. Don't go cranking those spoke tensions way up. And you want to spread over bigger areas you can. If you've got a bit of a kink, don't just focus on 1 or 2 spokes. Start with a small turn, then get bigger and bigger as you get towards where the kink is. Getting the egg out of the wheel, or the up and down truing, that is dead simple. It's the same principle. If you want the wheel to go down, you loosen the spokes. If you want the wheel to go up, you tighten them. And again, work over bigger areas you can, and don't go nuts with the tension. What I normally do is I'll try and get the side to side pretty damn good, and then I'll work on the egg, and often once you've worked on the egg or the up and down, the side to side may have gone as well. But if you work on little increments at a time, keep on swapping and checking, you'll get there eventually. So how's this trueness looking? So honestly, that's true enough for me to now check the up and down. Okay, it's going to be a bit hard to see from that camera. I'm going to try to get the GoPro out, try and show you guys. Now, not sure if you can see, there is ever so slight up and down there. So, on the parts where it's rubbing, I'm going to tighten these spokes. On the parts where it's not rubbing, I'm going to loosen these spokes. And it really is that simple. So if that's good enough for me, I'm going to leave that as that. And then I check the side to side trueness. has been thrown out ever so slightly. But won't take much to fix up. There. So just like the up and down, if it's rubbing on this side, I'm going to tighten the spokes on this side, vice versa. If the spokes are feeling tight on that side, I'll loosen this side. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You just need to judge for yourself which is the best way and how many turns you've done on the spokes. This is just stage one of the truing. This doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. I often do try to get this part as good as I can because it just makes the next stage a little bit easier, but don't stress too much. This bit can actually be a little bit loosey-goosey. So as long as there's some decent tension in the spokes and it's fairly true, that's all you need for this next step. And speaking of steps, this is when the shoe comes in. Oh yeah. You may have heard of people stressing their wheels. The reason you do this is you want the steel spokes, which are hard, to dent the soft aluminium and possibly soft carbon. To be honest with you, I've never built carbon wheels before. I don't know if they do dent or not, but they certainly do on aluminium ones. If you've ever debuilt a wheel, you'll have seen there's actually quite big indentations in the hub where the spoke is dug into it. That's effectively what you want to happen now, because if you don't do that now, when you go out riding, it will happen then, and then your spokes will come loose. So if you're having loose spoke issues after you've built wheels, you're not stressing them enough. A common way I see people stress spokes is to get it and try and, flex it between their arms. And that might work on a road wheel or a cross-country wheel, but on mountain bikes and especially trials, the rims are so stiff, you pretty much need to be the Hulk to get any flex in there at any point to stress a wheel at all. So doing that with your elbows or even pressing it against the floor, that's just not going to do it. So this is where the shoes and the cardboard box come in handy. Now if you want to really stress your wheels, you're going to have to get some weight behind it. What I normally do is pop the wheel down some cardboard and literally just stand on it. I want to stand on every single spoke crossing, and I'm literally putting all my weight, I'm standing on this thing, I'm not holding back. And I put all my weight and bounce a little bit on every single spoke crossing. And then swap and repeat on the other side. Now I picked up that stamping technique from Adam at Tartybikes. He is an amazing wheel builder, and if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. It may look drastic, but I've never broken a spoke, I've never broken a rim, I've never broken a hub from stamping on a wheel. So yeah, wheels can take a lot more than you think, and it makes your wheel pretty much indestructible for when you actually go out riding it. Right, so now that has been well and truly stressed, pop it back on the wheel building jig, and there's a little bit of movement in there, it's gone a little bit, but more importantly, there's a lot more slack on the spokes now. So what I normally do now is go around and do at least one full turn. Normally I'll have to go around and do another half turn or full turn after that. And then, once I've done all that extra tensioning, that's when I'll do my final truing. So, on that note, I'm going to go around and get this extra tension on. One thing I do at this point, when the spoke tension is getting pretty high, is I'll go and do my full turn, and then I'll add a little bit more, and then crank it back. The reasoning being that when you get this tight spokes now, when you're tightening the nipple, often they'll bind and they'll just twist the spoke. So if you tighten them, you go a little bit more, and then if you turn them back a little bit, if the spoke has twisted, it'll twist back. You can fix this by stressing the wheel as the last process, but I do find that cranking them a little bit more and then winding back actually works pretty well as well. Cool, so that's all the turns I'm going to do on the spokes now. That is pretty much the final tension that I'm going to go with. Now I just need to make sure this thing is still true, which it isn't, but it won't take much to get it true. A little tighten there. Fortunately, the up and down eggness is actually pretty good. It hasn't shifted much from the stressing. This is actually where really good quality parts help, so having a good quality rim really helps keep it true after all the stressing. So sometimes you may find you have to do quite a lot of work now, but fortunately this time I don't. At this point it's probably a good idea just to whip the wheel out, get over there, and actually just, you can do a fairly traditional stress out here, although this is actually one of the stiffest rims I've ever felt in my life. But if you do a pre-stress now, that is just to unwind the spokes, because if you've ever gone out on a brand new wheel and you've heard your wheel ping, that's the spokes just pinging back into place. It's not the end of the world if you can't get rid of that now, but if you could, that's probably a good idea. Now this is also the point where if this was a client wheel, I'd get my spoke gauge and I'd go around and check that they're all at the same tension. And it's all looking good. They're within the parameters that I like to use. The other thing you can do is go around and go by the sound. And you want them to all be roughly the same. They're not going to all be identical because obviously some have had ever so slightly more turns just to get the trueness different. And you know what? That is a finished wheel. Pretty stoked on that. So there you go everyone, that is how you build super strong wheels ready to take on any street riding you can throw at it. I hope I've made it clear enough. In my head it is quite simple, but when I try to explain it, it ends up sounding really complicated. If you have any questions or you're confused about anything, please ask in the comments below. I'll also link you to some pretty good handy sites that will explain kind of what I've done, except in black and white. All I need to do now is get the cog and tyre and rotor on my wheels and get out, test them. I'm pretty excited, first time ever on carbon rims. The Torch hubs I know work, I'm loving the colour, matches my frame, so it should look pretty pimp. And check out this sound. How nice is that? I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. I will make a video of me riding these as soon as I can. I'll get some feedback on these carbon rims, and I'm actually going to try some cush core in these as well. So, got a few things I need to test. But until then, be fluent, get out, ride your bikes, and if you are building a wheel, good luck. I hope it goes alright for you. So, take care everyone. Bye bye.